information on Julie, or Julie, I can't see, for some reason, I can't see all the participants, but Julie, if you want to come off mute and introduce yourself, feel free to do so.
I think we might be waiting for a number to join here. I don't see a Julie.
Yeah,
so
I don't
far.
either. I don't either.
For some reason, my little arrow is not working, so I only see like the 3 people that's on my screen.
I'd probably give it just a, if you don't mind, and Antonio, just a couple more minutes.
Yeah.
Just so, looks like we have about 17 panelists and 14 people watching. So
Nice. I'm gonna jump off real quick and jump back on to see if I can get my Zoom to work properly here real quick.
this is Julie's first meeting, so hopefully she's not getting tangled up in the whole panelist versus, you know, how I send you guys that link. While we're waiting, if everyone could, next to their name, rename themselves by putting the district, or if you're a mayoral appointee, please. Or if you work for DOTI like I do. So I would imagine, Antonio, go ahead and just start, or Raymond, whoever's going to kick us off, and then we can always circle back with Julie if she joins us. Oh, there she is. Julie has joined us.
Hi, sorry about that.
Perfect. Well, welcome, Julie. We're excited to have you, and give this moment to you to, if you want to introduce yourself or say anything about yourself, feel free to do so.
Yeah, I'm Julie Riskin. I live in Council District 9. I'm a disability rights advocate. Jamie is our transportation expert, but so I'm a bus rider. I've lived in Denver almost 30 years. I don't know what else, if there's anything else you want me to say, but thank you.
No, thank you for being here, and excited to have you part of our team. So from there, I'll kick it over to you, Jonathan.
Absolutely. All right. So I'll run down the list of names expected here today. If you give me a quick eye, if you are in attendance, I will mark you down. So to kick things off, Antonio.
Present.
Lucia.
Here.
Alicia. No Alicia so far. I'll circle back in case she's getting off mute here. Brian.
I'm here.
Jake.
Here.
Alan.
Hello.
Michael.
Here.
Paul. Paul Gonzer. No response here. I'll circle back at the end here. Ray.
Here.
Christopher Johnson.
Here.
Joe.
Here.
Jamie.
Here.
Eileen.
Here.
Curtis. No Kurt. All right. Chris Pacheco. Christopher Pacheco. Don't hear it. All right. I am here. Julie, you just introduced yourself. Tangier.
Here.
And Manuel.
Here.
All right, we'll just do one last lap through those that didn't respond. Alicia, are you here today?
I am here.
All right. And let's see, also Kurt and Chris Pacheco. No response there, so a couple absences. Ready to move on.
Thanks, Jonathan. And then now we will jump into our public comment session. Michelle, do we have anyone sign up to speak?
Yes, we have four people signed up. Let me see if they are. I checked earlier, they weren't there yet. The first one is Alex Stein. I'd have to come back to Alex. I don't see you, Alex. Okay, Jamie Anderson, I'm gonna have you go first.
And while we switch over to public comment, I did just want to remind that we have a 3-minute time limit for each of our speakers today.
Just give me a second, guys. Zoom is not happy with me. I'm going to come back in.
While we have this time, I did, for those who might be tuning in on the phone or haven't had a chance to look at our agenda today, what we'll be having going on is a report from DOTI leadership, along with a look into the 2022 capital projects pipeline. And then from there, we're going to jump into the right-of-way policy that DOTI has. And then from there, we'll jump into potentially what our advisory board subcommittees will look like. And then from there, we'll just use that, if we have the time, the last 15 minutes to just wrap up any loose ends we may have and discuss what's next for our meeting.
Still struggling with this. It worked earlier. Okay, perhaps we can go to the next agenda item, Antonio, and introduce Earl, and I'll still keep playing with this, okay? I don't want to keep you guys. Just give me
That sounds good to me. I'll kick it over to you. Nick, was this you jumping in? Perfect.
You're muted, Nick.
Yeah, we can't hear you, Nick. It says you off mute, but we still can't hear you though.
Go.
Perfect.
Go for it, Earl. I don't know what to do here.
All right, can you hear me?
Yep.
I'm sorry, my voice is a little bit parched, but I am the new CFO here at DOTI, and this is my first advisory board meeting. I've been in the role now here just over, it's right at about a month at this point, and I'm coming to DOTI from the Chicago Transit Authority, where I worked in the Office of Management and Budget. And prior to that, over the better part of the 15 years before that, a lot of rail and public transportation experience via BNSF Railway, the New York State Metropolitan Transportation Authority, and finance at Bank of America. And I'm glad to be here today.
Thank you, Earl. Are you able to hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes.
There we go. Okay, well, thank you. Those are all the great things I was going to say about Earl. Of course, we're very excited to have him here. So Earl oversees the group that we've heard a couple times in Zach Cartaya on there. So kind of the budgeting aspect of that, and thought it would be very important for this group to be introduced to him. So that's Earl, and we're very excited to have him and feel very lucky. And yeah, you'll certainly see him again.
So I figured out what was going on, everyone. Jen Hillhouse, can you give me back control?
Wow, I didn't know I had all the control.
I know,
here.
you're so powerful.
Absolutely.
See, you're a host now, and I took it away from her. I gave it to you. Let's just say I gave it to you.
Okay, you may have to walk me through how I do that, Michelle.
So go up to if you go to participants and you go to Jen Hillhouse, and you go over to
Okay.
more, or actually go to me. Go to me and hit more and hit to host.
Got it. Okay.
I'll never give my power away again, you guys. You see it, Jen?
I am getting there. Make you the host, right?
Yes, please.
Okay, here you go. Should be good to go now.
Okay, everybody. Sorry about that. Jamie, I'm going to have you go first. I didn't see Alex. Okay, so everybody, this is Jamie Anderson. Jamie, are you with us?
Hi.
Thanks, Jamie. Sorry about the confusion.
Yeah, no problem. Well, I wanted to make a public comment about issues with the clearance of sidewalks and bike lanes. I live over in 80219 in the Westwood area, and I do a lot of bike commuting, and I've noticed that Morrison and Knox, the bike lanes are almost never cleared of snow and ice. And I assume anyone who's been over there knows that cars go pretty fast along there. So it would be really helpful to keep the bike lanes cleared, because it feels very dangerous to be out in traffic especially on Knox, where those hills are, between, what is it, like 6th and Alameda. One other thing I wanted to note is that I use Perry sometimes as a connector, and where Perry crosses over 6th Avenue, there's no like homeowner or business that is in charge of that sidewalk. And I submitted a request to 311 to get the sidewalk taken care of, and I heard back that that is CDOT's responsibility. And I just can't imagine that CDOT is going to come out and clear the sidewalk for a single block on Perry, but it's also like pretty hazardous there, especially on the, I think it was the east side of the street was particularly icy. So I wonder if there's something that could be done about these like single blocks that are a CDOT issue. So yeah, that's my comment. I've never done a comment before, so I don't know how to end that, but thank you.
Oh, thanks for sharing, Jamie. And I wrote that down too as well, so we can have that followed up by DOTI too. So thank you for your time too.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, the next on the list is June Churchill. June, let me. June should be joining us.
Oh, goodness gracious, this is nerve-wracking. Hello, everyone. Likewise, I have not done public comment before, and I haven't slept today. So in case I sound a little out of sorts, that's why. I've got a prepared statement. Hello, my name is June Churchill. I'm a 5-year resident of the university neighborhood. I'm here to speak on the necessity for Denver to make our streets safer and our city healthier by reclaiming urban space from automobiles. It's shocking to me that at this time, when Denver gets ozone alerts every day in the summer and our skies get choked with smog, that we continue to cater our infrastructure to cars. Our street adjacent sidewalks are narrow and uneven, while our bike lane network is patchy and often remains uncleared of snow even days after a major storm. Reducing the number of vehicles on our roads is vital for the climate or health and city budget. There are a multitude of effective solutions to this problem. First and foremost, we must make all Denver open and shared streets permanent. This incredibly successful program made the city better for everyone, and it's clear that this program should expand. In addition, Denver must do a better job of maintaining and expanding sidewalk networks, especially in underserved areas with critical walking needs. When planning on a citywide scale, we should make sure to emphasize network connectivity to separate pedestrians and cyclists from cars and make sure cars take the long way around. We can take the goals of Denver Moves and be even more ambitious by committing to adding hundreds more miles of bike lanes instead of just 125. Add more neighborhood bikeways that have actual built infrastructure, not just sharrows, ban cars from areas of downtown, prioritize connecting our bike and pedestrian infrastructure to mass transit, and more. However, stating goals is no good without a budget to match. This year, DOTI is planning to spend $43 million to expand the off-ramp at Broadway and I-25, while having only spent $13 million on bike lanes in the previous 3 years. By the estimation of DOTI's Denver Moves plan, it will cost $110 million to complete all necessary high priority pedestrian crossings and connections. DOTI says it will cost $1.7 billion to make Denver truly walkable. DOTI is planning to spend only $3 million on capital investments to sidewalks this year. At that rate, it would take 573 years to finish this plan. Actions speak louder than words, and if we're to create a sustainable, walkable, and healthy city, we need to reallocate funding from car-centric projects to ones that fund RTD, create bike lanes, and build walkable streets. Please, when you are voting on capital projects, choose bikeways, pedestrian trails, network connectivity, and mass transit over the next refresh of a local freeway. We need it for our planet and for our city. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, June, for that too. And I appreciate you taking the time to really just put the thought into that statement, and also to bring that here and share it with us. I think a lot of what you shared, the board has also echoed in our own comments. And so just wanted to let you know that we thank you for this. And I wrote this down, where you're from, what you want to see. So, and make sure that that's top of mind when we have our conversations. And then also too, when we're looking at what's going on across our city, to make sure that we pass that information along to residents like yourself. So we can see where we are in terms of just getting a walkable city. So thank you.
Here to make sure that you guys get public support as well as being the voices on the board yourselves. So that's what makes your position all the easier to advocate with and for.
Thanks,
Thank you,
June.
June. Okay. Next one is John. John should be joining us in a second. John, are you with us?
There we go. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, excellent. Thank you very much. My name is John Rickey. I'm in the Sun Valley neighborhood, although I've lived all over the city. I've commuted by all different means, by foot, by train, by bus, by bike, by car. And thank you for having me taking public comment today. I wanted to say, I'm here today to speak about the bikeways that Denver DOTI is currently creating on Denver streets. Unfortunately, my comments aren't as complimentary as I'd like them to be. I wanted to point out that they are inadequate in their current designs for a couple of reasons. First of all, they are not actually bicycle infrastructure as far as I can tell. They seem to be Sharrow's Redux. I know that DOTI is adding traffic circles and bulb outs to these bikeways, but those don't make bicyclists safer. They do slow cars, which is good plain old traffic calming, And I'm in favor of traffic calming. You should add bulb outs and traffic circles all over the city, regardless of whether you expect bikes to be on the street or not. But to do that and then call it bicycle infrastructure, I think is a bit not disingenuous, but it's not totally honest either. Secondly, the bikeways as they are being implemented, I've seen are either coming as backup for replacements to actual protected lanes. And in those cases, they are not even taking the same routes as the protected lanes that were originally proposed. They're taking zigzag routes. They're starting on a street and then crossing over the street they were intended to be on, and then going up another street, and just up down left right all through the corridor, and they're missing the actual corridor where the bicyclists want to be. Direct routage is actually important to bicyclists. We're not out here to waste our time, just like motorists aren't out here to waste their time. We're trying to get to places, and you don't do that by giving us a whole bunch of detours. And so I'm here to ask the city. It bothers me that the mayor and DOTI are promoting these bikeways as great wins when they are at best sad compromises. Put them in, I suppose, but don't call them bikeways. Call them traffic calming. Call them traffic calming corridors. Say that they're car infrastructures to make neighborhood traffic safer, but don't call them bicycle infrastructure and then pat yourselves on the back for having completed the job that you set out to do, which is to make safe places for bicyclists to ride their bikes, to make useful infrastructure for bicyclists to get from A to B, because it's simply not. That's it. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, John, for sharing, especially the concerns, especially when we talk about one, making sure that we have infrastructure that's connected, but two, that is efficient in terms of when we're not traveling in the car. And I make sure to write that down in terms of, how do our bikeways incorporate tagging along to our protected infrastructure that already exists or existing bikeways. So I think that'll also be a good conversation when we start to dive into our 2022 capital projects pipeline, and then the next couple months too, once we start to look at the overall budget and what's to come in this next fiscal year. So I think those comments align with what we want to see. And then two, I think it also just matters in terms of making sure that we're not just building infrastructure and it's not connected. And then when we have infrastructure, make sure that it is one that protects us while we travel. So thank you for that, John.
There was one missing spokesperson, and I'm going to try somebody on the list. Their name is, it's Rediet A. Let me see if this is Alex. If not, well, this is a guess. Here we go. Hello, are you Alex? I feel like I'm shooting in the dark here. I just promoted you to panelist. Are you Alex Stein? Okay, I think we should go ahead with our agenda. Thanks to everyone.
Thanks, Michelle, for getting everyone connected. Next, what we have on the pipeline is the 2022 capital projects. And before actually we jump into that, I did want to acknowledge the emails that we have received from concerned community members who couldn't be in attendance today, but also sent over their email. So those have been seen, and we look forward to having a response to those. So I did want to acknowledge those people who aren't here, but we have received emails in terms of just comments. So I just want to acknowledge that first. Next, what we have is the 2022 capital projects pipeline. And I'm not sure who is taking over that from DOTI, but we're ready for you.
All right, I will introduce Chairman Benton. We have David Nemovitz, who is Deputy City Engineer and a relatively new addition to the DOTI team. Jen Hillhouse is our Director of Transportation Planning. And I'm not sure, I should scan through here real quick if we have Patience Reuter.
I don't see her, Nick.
I
Not
don't
seeing
think
her.
Patience
All
is
right.
here.
I will give it over to Mr. Nemovitz.
Yes, hello, can everybody hear me?
Gotcha.
Yes.
Okay, good. I'm having extreme technical difficulties on my end, so please shout out if there are any challenges. My video is really lagged, sound is really lagged, and I'm unable to share, so I'm hoping Jen will be able to share our presentation for you today.
Yes, I will. Michelle, I'll just need you to give me the privilege of doing so.
Great. So while Jen is pulling that up, I just wanted to thank you for having us here today and for the opportunity to hear some of the public comments. Our conversation today is going to be focused on our 2022 budget, capital improvement program budget. So I'm the deputy city engineer, so I'm head of our transportation program. And with me, I've got Ms. Jen Hillhouse. Jen is our mobility planning director and helps us work through all of our capital planning efforts in preparation to deliver our projects. So perfect. Hopefully everybody can see the presentation now. And Jen, if you want to roll to the next slide, I have no idea if I'm looking at the current slide or not.
Oops. All right, do you see this slide, Dave?
I do, thank you. Or at least I see half the slide. That'll work.
Does everyone else see the full presentation? Okay.
Great. So before we jump straight into the projects, thought it would be helpful to give a very brief overview of how these projects came to be within our 2022 budget. I know that you all have seen some presentations already that explains a little bit about the capital programming process as well as our equity index. So we'll touch on just a little bit of that as it leads into what our current projects are and the status of those projects. Next.
All right. So I think I was going to lean in here, Dave. So, you know, as Dave mentioned, I think you guys have heard about this and maybe previous information and presentations have been shared. So we'll go through this quickly and then you stop us and raise your hand if we need to go in more depth, but really just wanted to set the background and context, make sure we're all working from the kind of the same place and identifying where our projects come from. And so planning is so foundational to DOTI. We invest a lot of time and energy and resources in ensuring that we're planning and setting the vision and the goals and the metrics in the right way. So really what you're seeing here on your screen is we use Denver comprehensive plan that was done by the community planning department in coordination with DOTI that set a vision from a comprehensive standpoint from both land use and mobility. And from there, we work on what many of you, I think, have been involved. And we gave a presentation on Denver Moves Everyone, which is our strategic transportation plan that sits underneath the comp plan. And all our modal plans start to feed into that. So our bike master plan, our ped and trails master plan, transit Denver Moves plan start to inform the ultimate vision of 2050. And from there, you know, many projects, the need is identified, right? Projects could be identified at that point, but many times we move into feasibility. So that might look like a corridor plan, next step studies. We're really defining the project. We're setting high-level planning analysis and cost estimation to that, and then it can move into concept design. So many places where our projects come from, but looking at these modal plans where we're working very closely with the community to understand what the needs are. We're working on the ground, right? Not just from that visionary and data perspective, but also from an individual perspective that lives and kind of breathes this world every day. So our values are so critical to us, right? Again, developed from community. This is the most recent Denver Moves Everyone values and goals that you guys saw at the last presentation that we were here, and really looking at mobility, moving everyone, right? This is about people, and that icon, you don't see a bike and bus and a transit, you see people. And we're really about how we move people the most efficient and safe way on our city streets, whether you are driving, taking a bus, walking, or riding a bike. Safety is critical, right? It's our, we have a saying internally, right? If it's not safe, we don't do it. If safety isn't behind us, everything we do, we have a safety lens. And reaching our goals of Vision Zero are bold, but we intend to get there. And we work every day very hard to make sure that we're thinking about all of our projects, initiatives, and programs in that perspective. Sustainability, so working really closer with CASR, we know that transportation is the second largest emissions, right? That we have a strong role to play in our climate crisis and the urgency that's coming to our city, our region, and the nation. So really having mobility take a role, and this might be for the first time where we're really starting to look at how do we partner, how do we make sure that these initiatives align and start to move in the right direction here. Community, right, is so critical to our work. Our work affects everyday lives, as you just heard from 3 individuals that spoke today. And we don't take that lightly, and really working with the community to understand how we best connect to the places they want to go, where they go every day, and the essential needs, right? Going to school, going to the grocery store, going to church, the services that community members have, and making sure that they are well connected and that we're building safe networks and not individual improvements, right? That they all connect together and the system starts to work together. And then quality, this is thinking through maintenance. So how do we take care of the assets that are already out there today? As we think about the new things, those are exciting and really important for us as a city as we grow, but we also have to think about how we maintain what's in place today, and that we don't allow our infrastructure to degrade in ways that we can't keep up with. And then as you see, equity is a theme throughout all of these goals and values. It is not a standalone, because equity needs to be in everything that we do, from mobility to safety, to sustainability, community, and quality. So that's a theme and a thread that you see throughout. And then, so how do we take this? Lots of needs, right? We hear a lot of great opportunity, and there's only so much budget, right? We work hard to look for outside funding through grants, federal and state, but CIP is limited, and we compete across the city on many, many needs of homelessness and housing, and mobility is a high priority, but it also is next to other very high priorities. So within DOTI, we have a prioritization tool that is best practices of a multi criteria assessment, MCA, if those of you in the planning field have heard that before, where we look through many tiers of phasing. So tier 1 is very data driven, right? Using GIS to pull the data that we have. So this looks at crash data. If we're on a high injury network, our equity is an index that I know you guys are very well versed in, that we bring in from the GIS perspective. Also the climate, we have some ability to pull in GIS there, and the multimodal connectivity. And so if we're on a bike, planned bike route, things like that, then we move into a qualitative tiering, which starts to think through our mission and alignment to the values that we just discussed, ensuring that we're thinking about the safe movement. So does this project, now that we understand that it is on a corridor or it has a crash picture, is that project actually going to have a countermeasure to fix the issue at hand? We look at, are we actually improving the reduce of delays and accessibility and serving our vulnerable populations? And then the screening on the DOTI-wide alignment to the values and the comp plan is where that comes in. And then we can weight based on kind of priorities and the lens that we're looking through. And then just quickly, I know I'm taking a lot of time. I realized I looked at the clock. I could talk about this stuff all day. So very quickly on the budget process. So as DOTI sets priorities, right, then it moves through the citywide machine. All those priorities I talked about, looking at the mayor's priorities, city council priorities. And then from a mobility perspective, the capital revenue fund contingency is always set aside to ensure that we're looking at inflation and other risks that might come in. They also take off the top any financial commitments and obligations. So this could look at like our TMAs, right? Our transportation management associations. We have agreements with them. So that money comes right off the top to make sure that we adhere to that partnership that we've built. And then capital maintenance. And then finally, the new capital project request that David is going to walk us through. But before we get there, wanted to just, I think Dave, you were going to walk us through kind of how typical transportation funding sources and uses play out on an annual basis. So I'll hand it back to you.
Great, thanks. Yep. So Jen basically set the story of like, how do we get to a typical request? This slide here just represents what does our average funding look like on the left. So in transportation, we've got the 4 different funding buckets identified, and you'll see the 40% in blue, the capital improvement funds. That's what we're really here to talk about today. And so this just kind of illustrates how the funding comes to be in the transportation space. On the right, what you'll see is then what the distribution or the makeup of the allocation of those fundings, how we typically tend to spend it. So a lot of our efforts, as you'll notice, are focused on maintaining and operating our facilities. And then we do work as much as we can to fund our expansion and our annual programs as well, but to a much lesser extent in our annual spend. So next slide, please. So if that's what the annual looks like, all right, so this is what the 2022 CIP budget priorities, this is how it distributes out. So we had about $85 million split between capital maintenance and improvements projects. So in capital maintenance, it was about $49 million. I'll show you in the next slide what the distribution of that looks like. And then we have DOTI improvement projects. That's so for those of you that have looked at the mayor's budget book, that's how these are illustrated and articulated right now. So this is a representation of the budget book. So the DOTI capital maintenance, the 49 million that comes from the budget book. We also have 2 other buckets, DOTI improvement projects, the 26 million, and the transportation and mobility capital projects programs. That is also another bucket, but the last 2 bullets, the last 2 buckets there are really one and the same. The last bullet is just a representation that there's $9.2 million from the special revenue fund that feeds the same capital improvement program. So collectively, that represents $35.8 million in transportation projects, new projects. Next slide, please. So details, this is what it looks like. So this is, again, this is our capital maintenance. So again, this is straight out of the budget book. I've consolidated a little bit for the group into our kind of our asset categories, the categories of things that we maintain. And so what you'll see here as an example, we'll step through bridge maintenance and emergency repairs, $6.8 million for 2022. And that's to provide the maintenance, rehabilitation, and replacement of existing structures. And also includes emergency repairs. And so what you'll see as you sit through these is you'll see that this covers kind of our at-large capital maintenance items. And you'll see the bulk of the efforts really goes towards the street repaving and maintenance and the signals equipment and maintenance as well. In the street repaving, I'll just point out maybe real quick, in that effort, we program out, we're just now starting a contract we'll have 3 major contracts or 3 buckets of contracts for the street repaving that we'll do alongside of our internal city-led efforts. We'll get city-wide projects. All council districts will get repaving efforts in 2022, and that is determined mostly by our asset management programs that help us look at condition and where we have needs based on condition. I didn't want to dig too much into maintenance and instead wanted to focus on the next slide, which is our improvements projects. I think that's where the highest interest lies. So let me know if the slides changed. I can not see too well.
I believe it is, yes.
Okay, thanks. I'm just kind of winging it here since I'm not seeing the screen. So I have two slides here to represent the projects in the improvements category. The first I've broken out are discrete projects. So these are projects that look like they stand alone, so they're not part of our annual program necessarily, and these are our projects to accomplish a particular set of work. So I'll step through quickly, but I do want to kind of give some background on these projects. So Alameda Underpass design, and by the way, I'll just show second column highlights the equity index as identified through, I think, a previous presentation that you all have seen, working with Jason Smiley in our GIS department and assessing these equity index values. Then in the next column, we're showing the CIP funding amount. So that's the amount that was provided in the budget book in the 2022 budget, not necessarily a representation of the full project cost. And then we have updated the current project status for all of these projects. And then I highlighted what's being funded. And so we can certainly dig in a little bit if there's an interest to do so, but let me just step through very quickly. So the Alameda Underpass design, for those of you who are aware, that is for a set, it's for Alameda between Santa Fe and Cherokee. And this is for a future planned project to reconstruct the entire corridor. And so the $4 million funding amount is not enough to reconstruct the entire effort, but it's simply to be able to initiate a preliminary design. And that is the phase that we're currently at. So that's why it says planning. We are right now working on developing our scoping documents so that we can move into a preliminary design to fund this very large corridor reconstruction project. We also have DOTI project delivery support. That's staff augmentation to help us to deliver our work. We do not have enough internal resources to deliver all the work that we have on our plate. And so we leverage professional services to help us. So these are folks that come in and support our project management efforts ongoing. Gateway regional infrastructure. So this is actually with our gateway area. It's like a metro district, like a metro district is a little different. And we have kind of an agreement where they collect fees and then they share those, they transfer those fees to the city. The city then converts that to capital infrastructure dollars. And then DOTI takes those dollars and helps to implement improvements in that gateway area. And so the $1.8 million is a collection of fees. And then we do have some projects identified for 2022 that are in process right now. There's an I-25 sound mitigation study. This study has not begun yet. So this is an effort that will be coming later in 2022 as we work to identify the specific goals and expectations of the project. Ultimately, it's $500,000 to perform a sound mitigation study and to look at land uses along Bucktail from Downing to University.
And hey, Dave, it looks like we have a hand raised.
Perfect. I can't see anything. Thanks. Yes.
Hey, yes, Jonathan here. Just asking on the gateway project, where can we find the bounds of what is defined as the gateway area? I'm not familiar with that term as either a neighborhood or a district. So I'm just wondering where that is.
Gotcha. Yes. Roughly that area is out in the Green Valley Ranch area. It extends, I think, on both ends or both sides of Pena Boulevard. We can get a little bit more information for you to help understand what the gateway area, kind of where it's located.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, wonderful. Mobility Innovation Program. So there's $250,000 allocated to a program that supports our kind of our forward-looking lens within our Department of Transportation. So we're always looking at new technologies or new innovations that can help us to improve the way that we deliver our work or that we use our infrastructure. And so in the case of this $250,000, that is largely focused on implementation of a shared streets initiative. So we've had over the past, during COVID, we had a pilot program to do some shared streets, giving the streets back to other modes of transportation And there was several pilots that were instituted over the last 2 years. And so this is to convert that from a temporary program to permanent program. So it's development of all the standards, rules, guidelines, so forth, and then identification of new permanent locations. So the Santa Fe Streetscape design, many of you may be familiar with the temporary improvements that have been done along Santa Fe. That's roughly between Colfax and 6th Avenue. We have implemented over the last year or so a number of streetscaping and multimodal improvements along Santa Fe. Those were temporary improvements, and we did that through a pilot project. So this funding now is to begin the design efforts to convert that to a permanent streetscaping and revisioning of the Santa Fe corridor, implementing many of the things that we've done through the pilot program. We have a strategic transportation plan. This is really exciting for us, and Jen is actually leading the way on our behalf. This effectively is a new multimodal transportation program or planning effort, really, to help us to look at planning and prioritizing in a different way, a more dynamic way, where we're able to look at outcomes and develop scenario-based solutions for how we can plan our city network of all modes for all users over the next 30 and 40 years. And so that is in process. We're about halfway through that effort right now. And I think it's planned to be completed in later kind of the end of 2022, early 2023, something like that. If I'm getting that correct, Jen.
Yes, end of this year, we'll be wrapping up that project.
Great.
Yes.
And then our Washington Street area connectivity. So you may or may not be familiar. There is a lot of work going along Washington Street north of I-70. And in that area, that's right adjacent to our National Western redevelopment. And there's also a lot of redevelopment within the community in that area. DOTI is investing a lot of effort to help with the I-70 reconstruction as well, and then to make connections to all of our communities up there with all sorts of improvements. One of those improvements being reconstruction of Washington Street, which is kind of the network lifeline up there. And so this $3.785 million will go towards a local match for a raise grant that we were successful in getting, where we were able to get $13.9 million for making Washington Street a complete street. And also this aligns with our Elevate Denver Washington Street funding as well.
Hey, Dave, we have a hand. Tangiers got her hand up.
Thank you.
Sure, thanks. Hi, David. Thank you for breaking this down for us. I have a question about the Washington Street. I feel like I saw a community petition recently that was drawing attention to that CDOT property that's just north of I-70 on Washington Street, on the west-hand side of Washington. Just wondering if CDOT has to keep that, or if there's any talk about actually turning it into a neighborhood, something useful to the neighborhood, as opposed to what it's been for all these years, empty.
Yes, and I might be able to help out here, Dave, and then you can jump in with anything in addition. So good to see you, Tangier. Absolutely.
Thank you.
We are working very closely with CDOT right now. As you know, I think you track this very closely. We have first right of refusal for property along the corridor. And so working really closely with CDOT to understand opportunities for affordable housing, any mobility needs that are in alignment there. And our Washington area planning analysis has really gone into helping with that, as well as Parks has a acquisition plan for property that they're purchasing to look at expanding parks. So the property along York could be great opportunities, but those discussions are happening, and happy to work with Nick and others, Michelle, to see if there's enough interest bringing those back as we understand more around timing and opportunity. But in discussion, I would say right now.
Cool. Thanks, Jen. Yeah, I mean, it's, indirectly related to transportation and connectivity, but I feel like everything up there, every piece that could be used to help move pedestrians and bicyclists more safely. Yeah, just curious. Thank you.
Mhm.
I think we have another question here or another comment. Chris Johnson.
Thank you. I really want to just say this is very helpful, and the detail that I was hoping to have in the conversation that I was hoping to have. So thank you very much. And I think the advisory board is very appreciative of this. I'd like to ask just a kind of a high level global question. Given our charter, this advisory board's charter, and the way that Jen and David, your process works, where would you see this group having the most, needing to spend the most time and having the most influence in directing and recommending slight changes or future planning projects for your organization? Over.
Yeah, that was perfect. I'll take that real quick, but then I'm going to pass it off to Jen, because I think that's a very poignant question, and I think you picked up on something that's very helpful for the conversation here. So I think the area where there's most availability for influence is in the planning space. So by the time the projects have made it this far, we're really in motion and have obligations to deliver in certain times. So there's not a whole lot of ability to change the projects at this point. But Jen, maybe you want to take that conversation a little bit deeper.
Yes, I really appreciate that question, because you guys are critical to our success, right? You have eyes out in the community, you have the ears in the community. So really working closely with you on where we have the most opportunity to influence. And I would completely agree with Dave. That is at the planning phase, right? Where these ideas are being born, the needs are being identified. And right now we have a great opportunity to work very closely with you on Denver Moves Everyone. We'll be hitting the community with our phase 3 engagement, which is asking just this question: what type of improvements do you want to see in your community? Where would you spend your dollars? So we're literally going through, giving $100 out to the community, and they have ability to spend it. And it is translated to the right percentages of what infrastructure costs. It's a hard thing to understand how much infrastructure is to move forward. And it's not pennies, right? And we usually have B's behind the work that we do. And so setting that stage, not only from education with community, but also how they would prioritize, because there are always trade-offs, right? We wish we could do it all, but we always have to make the hard decisions on what are we investing in this year, and looking at that 6-year plan, of course, but then looking at how we advance our goals in the best way possible with the resources that we have at hand. So I think working really closely with the planning, but more specifically on Denver Moves Everyone, is where we'll have, kind of a great opportunity at hand to make that work possible. And I would also say, understanding your, not only like if they're, planning is where we need to be, but if there are specific things of, seeing that we need more in maintenance, we need more in the multimodal, understanding those themes of where we need to invest and where your priorities are. So very similar to the questions that we're asking community would be very helpful and would influence us, as a department and where we spend money moving forward.
I think we have Antonio. You have a question?
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of touch back on the previous slide when we were looking at the percentages. And one thing I noticed right away was just, and when we talk about pedestrian, and we talk about Vision Zero, talk about transit, those are pretty low. And wanted to kind of talk about what can we do, because we know, like, for example, Vision Zero, that we're having more deaths on our streets than we ever have before. So what can we do on that side, to bump up those numbers when we as a city have that inverted, not triangle, but when we have the pedestrian at the top, when we have bicyclists and people who use wheelchairs and mass transit, how can we, get this slide to match those priorities, I guess, when we talk about really making our city more safe in terms of transit?
Yeah, I will just jump in here real quick, Antonio. I think that is a great comment, and where we hope Denver Moves Everyone will take us in addition, right? Because we'll set up a 6-year capital plan. We'll look at where is the need, how do we fund existing infrastructure, and does it align just with exactly the question you're asking with our values? So I anticipate that there would be some recommendations here. I will say though, it is a little bit misleading that really safety is in all the things that we do. So paving, right? That's how we move forward. A lot of our bike projects is within the repaving program. So we get a lot of ability to move forward there. Roadway reconstruction certainly has safety components in it. Signals certainly do, as well as the transit. So it's hard when you think about a mobility system to put it into these buckets, but overall you're getting the right picture, right? A lot is going into the maintenance. And then as we go down the line, I just don't want you guys, the areas are gray, right? The lines, it's hard to kind of bucket what safety means compared to our maintenance program, because they really all do work together. But I understand your comment and it's well received.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to add one comment. So Jen, that was a good description. One other thing I'll note is that there are new opportunities coming down the road every day to identify new funding to help with the things that, that we're talking about here with expanding our multimodal facilities, not just focusing on maintenance. And so as we look down the road, there are new opportunities with the infrastructure bill and with other programs to help us to expand our network as a whole. And so those are the things that, as we're working through our development of our 6-year plan, we're working to balance how do we manage our program at large and still focus on all the right things.
And I know we mentioned the Denver Moves, but we will have these same opportunities, right, when we talk about the budgeting coming up in April, right? Because Denver Moves is going to take a while in terms of engagement, finalizing all those numbers, but we'll have this same opportunity in budgeting. Am I understanding that correctly too as well?
Yeah, to some degree. I think this year we'll still have the same kind of process that we typically do. So even on the slide before this, Jen, if you wanted to go really quick, the budgeting cycle, the other direction. Yeah, on the right side of the screen. So there's a hierarchy, kind of a waterfall of how the budgeting works. And so we begin with that kind of total capital investment, the revenue investment, and then we work our way down. And so this year, I think, will look a lot like 2022 as we work through our budget cycle, but we'll have an ability to talk through our priorities and balance those with the budget.
And I would just add to Anthony, I think, absolutely, as DME will take some time, right? It will take a year from now for us to be finalized with that. But some of the questions that we're asking in community and what I would imagine you guys are working on within this committee, and then if you guys do break into subcommittees, is, where does that focus need to be? How do we ensure that we align to the values and kind of the shift that the department has made over the last couple of years? So I think all of that, those recommendations and those ideas would be welcomed. As we fit it into the machine, it could take us some time, right? We might not see this huge shift, and because we have to find the funding elsewhere, right? We can't let our assets go to waste if the capital opportunities are coming from somewhere else, and that frees up CIP to do additional initiatives. So absolutely, I think we would welcome those recommendations, the ideas coming from this team as we work on 23 CIP.
Aileen, I think you've been waiting patiently. Why don't you go?
Yeah, thanks. So I'm not as organized as I thought I would start this because of something that Jen said. Not blaming you, Jen, just an observation. So first where I wanted to take my comment was about the $28 million and I think this is the same bucket, the 32% of the annual appropriations that is dedicated to maintenance and paving. So I had some questions about how often do typical arterial streets need to be repaved versus streets that have bike infrastructure on them. Just as an aside, I live near South Monaco, where it's very clear that where the automobiles are driving on South Monaco, the street is damaged. There's potholes forming. And I was thinking, oh, how much longer till the street gets repaved? And then I looked over into the bike lane and it's pretty clean, looking pretty good over there. And so so there was that question. And then Jen made the comment about how that big bucket, that 32% of the annual appropriations is not just focused on paving and roadway repair, and that some of that money is used in fact to build the bike lanes. And so I think now just understanding where I was coming from when I originally put my hand up, and now I think where I want to go. Can we talk a little bit more about how much what multimodal infrastructure exactly is in that 32% in the paving? Because I just want to know, like, what actually is being spent on multimodal infrastructure, and what does the city consider to be multimodal infrastructure that is landing in this 32% bucket? Because if it's truly like paving bike lanes and striping bike lanes, then we should probably be giving ourselves a little bit more credit and putting it in the bicycle budget. I recognize that might be hard, but we've got to be clear about where we're spending our money. Or if it's little smoke and mirrors, we got to kind of own up to that too. So I just kind of want to get some more clarity on what multimodal infrastructure is actually in that 32% of the paving and roadway repair part of the budget.
Yeah, well, I can start, and then maybe Dave and Nick can clean things up. So
Yep.
I think my comment was it's very difficult, right, Aileen, when you have a system that you're working to improve, right, it's very difficult to bisect it. So when we think about signals, right, those are serving transit purposes, pedestrian infrastructure, safety mechanisms, right? So it's in a signal bucket, but it also can work to make crossing safer and ensure that our bicyclists can get through. So that was my comment, that it's very hard to put things in a very defined box because it all interrelates. And then, yeah, to the question specifically on bike paving or the paving program and how we work to advance our bike program. So this is kind of that one build philosophy, right? As we're out and we have a street that needs to be repaved, we also look at our bike program and say, hey, while we're out there, this street is slated for a bike lane. We need to improve it so that we're not paving the street, striping the street for a vehicle, and then coming back 2 years later and looking at that multimodal. So how can we get our multimodal system in place as we're out repaving? So there is opportunity where our ops crews are paving our bike lanes as they're resurfacing the streets. I hope that helps, but Dave and Nick, feel free to chime in.
Yeah, so I'll chime in next and just say, so first of all, I think Jen did a good job of articulating that. I think at the end of the day, these percentages are roughly accurate as much as you can identify analytics. Really, we're doing, like she said, one build projects. So we've got multiple scopes in all types of projects, but probably this is a fair representation. We do spend a large amount of our CIP revenues towards the repaving of our streets. And typically, streets need to be repaved about every 10 years or so. The more wear and tear that they get from the heavier vehicles, the more frequently they'll be damaged and need that repair. So what you're seeing on the road section, or the vehicle section of the roadway as opposed to the bike section, is exactly what we would expect in normal. And so that's kind of how it works. We have, I think, like 3,800 miles of roadway in the city and county of Denver. And so every year, we do our best to keep up with repaving those and keeping them in working condition. But it's a constant battle, even in the maintenance space, even though it looks like a lot of money and a lot of dollars being spent there, it's a constant battle to keep up with the condition of the roads as well.
I'm going to do a time check here, everybody. It's 5:05. We have 2 more media agenda items to come. So and we have 3 people that have their hands still up in the list. So I'm going to say if there's anything, we'll address the people that have their hands up. And then if there's anything that we need to kind of put in the parking lot and maybe come back to and do more of a deep dive later on about a specific subject, we can do that. So I'm going to go to Joe.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm on the same lines everybody else. So I've had my hand up for a while, but what I think is to call it a roadway, even now that I just heard, I don't think we should call our streets roadways anymore. That implies the wrong thing. And my point was, it sounds like you're doing it. As long as you're repaving these streets, we should think way beyond that. I don't mean putting the stripe on one side and have some stenciled lines on the thing, but how can we do more than that? So how do we make that fund really go a long way instead of a quote on roadway with a line on the side where if you can ride your bike. And then the other thing is, are there any demonstrations? I mean, real demonstration projects. So instead of going from all the planning, which basically what you showed us is mostly planning, is there some way we can take one block or something, get everybody behind it, do something really in a big way and not put plastic pylons up and some weird striping that kind of goes in and out and doesn't look safe for anybody. But is there any thought to doing maybe a block or 2 and really showing something and get everybody behind it so we can raise more money from the neighborhoods as opposed to paving the street every 10 years? And some, I know, even in my neighborhood, get repaved that maybe they could go 12 years. So that's my comments. And again, I pretty much agree with everybody at the table, less for cars, more for people. Thank you.
That's great. And just quickly, I really appreciate that comment, Joe. I think we really can prove a lot to ourselves by that innovation and piloting work and testing it, right? Understanding what works and then coming back and scaling it across. So I think we've stepped into this space, certainly an opportunity to do more. And with that innovations program, our intent is that we do have some piloting money next to us so that we can look at why we're developing the guidelines, advance some infrastructure improvements alongside of us. Bannock is a good example, right? Transforming that street into a community space. And that took some evolution and it still has a ways to go, right? Still in that pilot phase. 15th would be another with the red paint along the street and then a protected bike lane, still in very temporary phase, right? It doesn't have concrete, it's not hardened, but a way to kind of quickly, I think we turned that in a couple months of improvements for the bus, but more opportunity to come. And I completely agree. That's how we're going to scale our work. If we can focus on the pilots and understand what works and where we need to tweak.
Okay, Alan.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Jen and David, for being here. Really appreciate seeing you guys and for this insightful conversation today. Just a couple general comments. I'll go really quick since a lot of this has been chatted about already, but would love to better understand, what's more upstream, what the decisions are being made on potentially funded and have a little more transparency into that. And I think the city's goals are great. I think you guys are doing an outstanding job of the visioning around this, of the safety and sustainability and things like that. Just a general feedback. Would love to see more alignment with the budget with those goals. In North Denver, we're still locking a lot of sidewalks on major arterials, seeing a lot of pedestrians getting killed and or injured. So just, again, what everyone else said, would love to see more multimodal emphasis on some of this infrastructure. So thank you both so much. Really appreciate your time.
Thanks, Alan. Okay, Jake.
Yeah, thanks, Michelle. Sorry. I think I also reflect a lot of the comments that have previously been made. I definitely have some concerns about the percentages. I hear you in that some of them are reflected in some of the other budget lines, but I think, like a bike signal wouldn't exist if traffic conditions weren't dangerous. So I think it becomes a bit cyclical in a challenging way. So I would love to see the budget start to reflect our values more, because I think ultimately our budget is our values. So if it's not matching that, then it's really, really hard for us to say that we value something. I also think that these numbers don't actually look like a good reflection of our current mode share as well as our values, which also is a little troubling to me, particularly the transit line. As Denver tries to take on some more transit projects, have some concerns about the size there. But I think what I'm more concerned about is there's some logic that I get a little nervous about sometimes, and I think it's sometimes just a bit of structure in government and corporations, that there's this attitude that once something's started, that it can't be stopped. And I kind of heard that we should get involved at the planning stage, and kind of not worry about as much of the ones that are already further along because they can't be stopped at this point. And I think that there's a lot of really, really bad government decisions that have been made by continuing something because it was started, rather than reflecting the current conditions on the ground. And I think we're at a place where a lot of the conditions on the ground and the values of our community do not reflect some of these longstanding projects, particularly some of the ones that frankly we're partnered with on, like DRCOG, on some of the interstate projects. And that is a large percent of our budget that frankly we're following some sunk cost fallacy down. And I have some pretty serious concerns about that. So I'd love to kind of hear more ways that we can get involved. I think that's, part of the reason we're here is to help staff and the team kind of take a look at some of those projects and really say, does this reflect the current values? Because I think that, I don't know, I just get really nervous when someone says we've already made commitments, so it can't be undone. That just screams every case study of problematic decisions I've ever heard in my life. So that's kind of where my comments are, and would love to look at some of those projects with you.
That's great, Jake. And I would also say too, as the department shifts, right, because we've come a long way, and the value, right, there could be kind of what we call legacy projects that were in the works, right, that we have to look at and adjust, whether that be scope, to ensure that they're aligned with our values. So we have an internal process just for that. And looking at, we ask those questions: does it align with values? What is the scope? Do we need to match additional cost? So I think if you guys absolutely are seeing things like, whoa, that doesn't seem like we need to, it's moving in the right direction, it would be great to hear. And then I'll also say too, on that transit side, right, this is a good example. As we changed charter and we're now able to operate transit service, that's where you start to see those buckets grow. And I think it doubled last year, and we will continue to see, I think, that opportunity, that focus from the department on, we know that transit is our workhorse when we think about mode shift. Certainly we got to get the people to the bus, so the ped and the walking, the bicycle is really critical, and then safety on top of all of that. But I do think we're in this pivotal moment, right, where the department has moved from a public works to a DOT, and we'll start to see those changes in that wave kind of moving in different directions. But I appreciate the comments.
I'm going to jump in here too. There was a couple of questions about DRCOG projects. It's obviously not listed here, but I believe we're going to try to bring in, Nick, tell me if I'm wrong here, but DRCOG and start talking about some of those projects at possibly April or May.
Yep, that sounds right.
Good. Yeah, I'll just note that, what we're representing here on these slides are what was funded through our capital improvement funds in 2022. So other projects that have been referenced that are DRCOG funded, they aren't included in this set of projects, but that other work does exist out there, as well as many other projects, like through our Elevate funding as an example. This is just a representation of our capital improvements funds.
Sorry, David, this is Jonathan. Just to follow on that briefly. I know that many of the DRCOG projects receive matching funds from us, and they state in their forms that it is CIP funds, capital improvement project funds from different years. Do we somehow segment off those project decisions and those prioritizations often just like another process, even though the funding is coming from here? Is that funding actually coming from elsewhere, even though it's listed by DRCOG as from CIP? I'm wondering where those fit into our budget review picture.
Yeah, so it can be, there's another bucket of funding that is for payments. So when we have payments to make that are prior agreements, then that's a whole other bucket that I didn't bring into this conversation. I believe in this case, I'm not sure that there was any 2022 funding that was allocated to our Dr. Cog matches that wasn't already previously committed to.
And
But
then
I'd
those
have
other
to go look.
funding, yeah, and the other funding sources could be like Elevate, right? So they could come from bond, where we may have had an opportunity to advance, you know, a project, and then looking to, so the Colfax BRT would be a perfect example of that, right? Or 16th Street Mall, where we had some funding in place, and then we looked to the state funding to continue to increase the budget. So a lot of it is through CIP, but there we also will be creative in our capital stack, right? Usually these projects are so expensive, it takes a very diverse capital stack to make it all hit the ground in the right way. So Dave, do you want to maybe walk through this last slide unless there's other questions? And then we can.
Yes, so, yep, I'll try to step through this very quickly, recognizing the time. So the last set of projects that we looked at, those were discrete kind of standalone type of projects. This group here is a representation of our annual programs, the things that continue year over year, and the things that are harder to define in terms of this scope and it's in this phase. That's because as we look at, let's say, Denver Moves bicycle implementation, we have a continual kind of set or churn of projects in our bike space, and we're always turning kind of, you know, projects, a collective group of projects move from the planning space to the design space to the construction space, and then behind that there's a new set of projects that we're moving forward. And so this implementation here, the 6.85 million, is in support of the I guess the program at large, and in specifically can be pointed to a community transportation network that we're moving forward, which has, I think, 28 projects in it, more than 30 lanes of bike lanes, or 30 miles of bike lanes included in that, spread across, I think, 10 bike corridors. So that's a representation of how these annual fund programs are funded each and every year through this type of allocation. So Denver Moves Transit implementation, same kind of thing, supporting at large. So in this case, I can kind of give a little bit more detail. So we've got kind of two buckets of improvements that come through this work. One is for transit priorities along our facilities. So think like dedicated bus lanes or queue jumps or things like that. And then we also have a second bucket is kind of enhancing our existing bus stops for safety and comfort. So let me look, let's see, one example of our bus priority upgrades is through our downtown area and along our 17th and 18th corridors. And for our bus stops, we've been focused on the west side of Denver currently. So the neighborhood transportation and traffic calming, which sometimes is referred to as our NTMP, or sorry, Neighborhood Transportation Management Program, NTMP. So that is work that's focused in our neighborhoods that has very location-based and very kind of small area improvements, specifically focused on neighborhood enhancements, pedestrians, intersections, things of that nature. Let's see, and I think this year our focus, we've got some neighborhood focus areas. Harvey Park, Marley Action Plan is ongoing. We've got the Montbello Green Valley Ranch Action Plan, and then a Westwood Athmar Park design and construction effort going on in 22. Related, we've got a pedestrian crossing improvements. This is a focus on our, as it sounds, pedestrians and intersections. And so in this case, we've got 22 high priority intersections that we're working on things like short-term traffic signal timing, signing, marking, that type of improvement project. One thing I'll point out too, as I kind of go through this, a lot of these programs are supportive of other projects. So they're not just doing their own standalone projects, they're really embedded within the work that we do. So kind of goes to that one build type of philosophy, where when we are doing projects, we try to identify all of the things that we can include in that project with the intent of getting as much of a complete street as we can, or to be as efficient as possible, so we don't, do one project in 1 year and come back and on the same street and do the next project. So a lot of these programmatic funds are helping to fund improvements in other specific projects than just their own standalone projects. So Safe Routes to Schools, we've got another $500,000 dedicated to working on improving our access in school neighborhoods and school areas, access and safety. We've got our sidewalks, gaps, and safety repair program. That's a combination. So we've got $3 million allocated to filling in sidewalk gaps. So areas where we have sidewalks, where sidewalks don't exist. And then we also have, I think it's 1.8 million that goes to our safety repair program. So that's a different type of sidewalk effort, where we're looking at existing sidewalks that have safety concerns and are going out and repairing those to bring them up to current standard. And then finally, our Vision Zero implementation. So again, that's Vision Zero is kind of an embedded philosophy in all the work that we do, and supportive of many other projects, but also Vision Zero has very targeted projects that we focus on as well. And so those are kind of high crash intersections, road crossings. And so in that space, let me see here. I think there are 3 road safety audits that are currently in motion. Those road safety audits help us to identify safety concerns in particular areas. And then we turn those into small area implementations of safety improvements when in those areas. And so we've got those 3 that are ongoing currently. So I can't see if there are any comments as I've been talking or questions. Is there anything I can help to answer with this?
I think what I'm gonna, I'm sorry, go
Yeah,
ahead.
I think that's it for us, David, because we desperately need to move on to these next 2 topics. But
Great.
I want to thank you and Jen for taking the time to come speak with us tonight. I'm sure we'll be calling on you guys again just to answer some more questions, but just wanted to thank you both for your time tonight.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks for having us. And we will follow up on a couple of the actions, the Gateway District boundaries. And I took some notes, and we'll work with Michelle to make sure we're following up and following through with you guys. So thanks for the time. Appreciate it.
Thank you, guys.
Bye-bye.
Next, we have right-of-way policy, and that's going to be, I believe, presented by Michael Home.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I will introduce and give just a quick preview here. Mike Scott, luckily, I think this is well, regulatorily, it is a relatively straightforward topic here. Of course, once you put it out into the mix of the real world, it gets more complicated here. But today we have Mike Holm. Mike is a manager in our right-of-way services team that oversees right-of-way permitting and inspections on here. And a question came up at our last meeting or meeting before request regarding when you start to see typically kind of the orange plastic fences that are popping up in the right-of-way, specifically the tree lawn. Think of the grass area between the sidewalk and the curb. And frequently this has been done by the residents of adjacent property to prevent folks from lingering or camping in those areas. Mike is going to talk about why that is not a valid permit and a valid use of the right-of-way, which is simple, but how we administer that and try to prevent kind of the misuse of that is certainly more complicated. So I will stop there. I will hand it over to Mr. Holm. If everyone could give a big howdy to Mr. Holm here. He may have gone to Texas A&M University. I don't want you to hold that against him. He is an expert in this field, and Mr. Holm, the floor is yours.
I don't know about expert, but thank you for the introduction there, Nick, especially for someone who may have gone to school in Austin as opposed to College Station. So I was asked to talk about temporary fencing and how DOTI issues permits for that kind of a function. So we do issue permits to companies, businesses, residents, property owners who need to occupy the city's right-of-way. These permits are issued through the regulatory branch, as Nick mentioned, in DOTI, and that's right-of-way services, which is where I am employed at. So in regards to permits for temporary fencing, the instrument we use, the permit that we use for that is the street occupancy permit. This permit allows the permittee to place a temporary fencing in the right-of-way, and like Nick said, in the tree lawn area, which is the grass strip between the curb and the sidewalk, if there is one, or could be behind the sidewalk as well, as far as the public right-of-way would extend at that point. The permit's issued for a fee. It's not free, and it is for a specific 3-month time frame, and is renewable at the permittee's request. So they can get another 3-month permit after the first 3 months that expires from the first permit. There are some restrictions for this type of permit. First of all, the temporary fencing has to be easily removable. Like Nick mentioned, think of the orange construction fences. Not exactly the prettiest thing out there, I understand, but it is easily removable and easily put up. So we do see those out there. This permit is not for a permanent fence, like a chain link fence or even a steel barred fence, something like that. That's a separate permit, and the street occupancy permit cannot permit that kind of activity. Other restrictions are for vehicular parking. If it's next to a parking space along the road, it should not be put, the fence that is, should not be put directly behind the curb, because then you can't open the door to be able to exit the vehicles at that point. Also, pedestrian mobility must be maintained. It must be preserved. So no blocking sidewalks and no blocking corner ramps. And also utility access. There are handholds in the tree lawn area. There are valves to various underground utilities in those locations. And access to that needs to be maintained as needed by the utility owners at that point. So I mentioned that permanent fencing cannot be allowed through a street occupancy permit. These devices are like that kind of a fence would need to be applying for an encroachment permit, and that requires a much higher level of review and much more fees as well. Although I'm not the city expert on the encroachment process, I will refer you to look at the city's or DOTI's published rules and regulations for encroachments in the public right-of-way, which can be found on the DOTI web page. So are there any questions at this point?
And before we go into questions,
oh,
just
go ahead, Nick.
One thing to make very clear, permitting to prevent folks from lingering or putting a fence up to prevent folks from lingering or camping in the tree lawn is not a valid reason to receive one of these permits. Valid reason
Correct.
For vegetation regrowth. Now, that's not to say that we are out there ripping them all down as fast as we can. And it's not a lack of desire, it is a lack of capacity at right now. And so when we see these, they go into 311 and we prioritize based on safety, based on how we go out and address these. And so that's what you've seen. So we've certainly seen, and you know, if you're familiar with the Twitterverse, this comes up there frequently. So I want to be very clear that there is no permit to use fences to prevent folks from camping. That doesn't stop people from on their own going out and putting that fence up themselves. That's not allowed. And as capacity allows, we are visiting having those fences removed on there. So with that, I'll stop and happy to answer any questions.
Right. The most common use we see for these permits are, like you said, landscaping improvements, be that restoring the greenway or something like that and allowing seed to grow, or maybe some property owner would like to put in some sort of cobble or concrete or something like that, some sort of construction item that they'll be maintaining in the public right of way in front of their property. Those are the most common uses we see for this permit.
think Lucia, you were the first with your hand up.
Hi, yeah, thank you. So I was wondering how far this extends. You just mentioned cobble. I've seen some really rather hostile landscaping like Fifth and Broadway, the Meinigers property. They had encampments on there now. And so now they put in these really jagged, large rocks that I wouldn't want to walk across. Certainly if you have any kind of mobility issues, you wouldn't be able to get across them. Is that legal?
So the use of rock as a cover material in the public right of way, it depends. A small river rock, like a 1 inch or 2 inch rock like that is generally not allowed. Whereas if you look in the Streetscape design manual, which I hate to say, but that is an older document that we still occasionally reference, a much larger rock is allowable, something that is going to stay in place where it is and not wash down the street in the gutter during a flood or something like that, or the like. So a larger rock, yes. Even the boulders, to a certain degree, those are allowable as well, depending on exactly how big that boulder is. There are height requirements and restrictions based on how far you are from the curb, and those are in the encroachment rules and regulations as well.
But nobody can walk across those. They're ankle breakers.
Right. So the tree lawn area is not meant to be a public sidewalk traversable pedestrian area. It's meant for tree lawn, trees and lawn is what the idea is for that. But there are other landscaping options available. As long as the adjacent property owner is maintaining those things, it's allowed.
And Mike, just to clarify, even with those larger, more permanent rocks or whatever, they would require a permit as well, correct?
Correct.
Okay, let's turn to Jake.
All right. I'll admit I have a little bit of a longer comment here, but as a lot of my team knows, I am the one that suggested this topic. As the District 10 representative, I have received endless comments from people in my district, kind of stating their challenges and frustration with this fencing. And actually an almost more resounding frustration with the responses from 311. In particular, I've heard widespread responses from 311 of no violation or no issue found, which is obviously pretty frustrating, especially because I have one resident who sent me a screenshot of his 311, has 7 case numbers with DOTI that all say like no violation or no issue found, and he linked the actual rules and regulations from the city government in there, and then called out specific line items that may be an issue point. And I think it, like, one, I'd like to bring up, it's obviously pretty frustrating to residents that know what they're talking about to be told that there's no violation when it's pretty clearly labeled as a violation. We've acknowledged it's a violation, and it seems to kind of refute the, that there's obviously enough capacity to tell someone there's no issue. So there should be some capacity to either say we're looking into this or it's added to a queue rather than purely dismissing the resident. I don't think that that's good governance, and it really bothers me, frankly. I've also heard from sedans. There are a lot of sedans in Capitol Hill, and they've talked about how dangerous these fences are when they're stopped at a stop sign legally. When they're stopped at a stop sign legally, they cannot see the intersection or cars that may be coming down because the fence is ahead of them in the tree lawn. And so in particular, it is actually a pretty urgent safety issue that has been neglected. And I know that when 9 News did a report on this 3 months ago, they said that not one permit was reported from DOTI, which also calls out the issue. And I know that the ones that 9 News issued, because I don't live too far away, have been up now for almost a full year. So I don't understand how they could legally still be there. I have personally submitted issues with them and gotten a no violation as well, which is frustrating for me too, but it validates the residents of Capitol Hill that it is basically a widespread response from the city at this point. There's also a large amount of these fences covering up bike racks that are labeled Denver and have the Denver logo in them. I've also been told that's not a violation to block that off. And that frustrates me because I think that that's Denver Capital going to those bike racks. that now a private adjacent landowner has blocked off. There are also instances in Capitol Hill of bike racks being blocked off by large rocks. It's kind of hilarious. There's like a bike rack with like 3 feet of piles of rocks all around the bike rack. So it's it's like comically unusable. Also been told that isn't a violation. So I think that, you know, I understand the lack of ability to enforce. I'm struggling with when these fences have been up for a year for these landowners to not have received a single issue. When I know of a handful of properties that have had at least 10 reports against them. So I think I'm just really struggling because I've never seen one of these addressed. And I know the ones I've reported, I know the overlap with other people. And I think when 311 gets to the point where it is not being addressed properly by the city, we have a really big problem. And I think that it basically means our city's not functioning. So I'm trying to figure out like how we overcome that. I mean, this is a pretty clear issue. Some of these have been publicly called out in the news and still haven't been enforced. A lot of these are migrating to steel and metal now. They've decided that the orange fencing is too easy to rip, so they've kind of gone with chicken wire or something more aggressive, which I've cut a coat on. Like it is, I mean, the safety issues are actually pretty big here. Or people have gone with landscaping fences that are like a foot tall for like, I think they're used at like golf courses. That I've seen a ton of people trip on, especially runners when they're trying to pass someone. They don't see the little tiny, cute little chain link fence and they just trip. But my neighborhood's calling me and texting me and talking to me in person. They are furious. And the city, they don't feel like the city's listened to them. They know they've talked to council. They're getting zero response. And I think just from District 10, I'm crying out that we are in crisis on the right of way here. Everyone is bringing it up to me all the time. I don't want to talk about right of way fencing. I want to talk about other issues that affect DOTI. But this is affecting the constituents in my neighborhood so badly. And honestly, the city has closed the door on them. And it's really painful.
Thanks for that, Jake. Yeah, no, this is a challenge, and you know, we've looking more into it, and yeah, it's a resource prioritization, but understand the concern about this. You know, this starts to bring in kind of the broader response to unsanctioned encampments, things like that. And I certainly don't want to at 5:37 today start to open that up and that. But it is, you know, this is a symptom of that on there, and yeah, I agree. It definitely, it needs more attention.
Actually, sorry, if I could add just one more thing. I know of other neighbors that are adding the fencing because they don't feel like they have an option because everyone else has a fence. And so the lack of enforcement is actually becoming cyclical. So like, I'd like to say that the earlier we address this, the actual less resourcing we need. But people are saying, well, if they have a fence and they don't want something in their yard, I don't want it in mine. And we're at a, I mean, that is a rabbit hole that's way too big.
No, that's a good point.
But thank you.
Okay, Jamie.
Yeah, just quickly, I just want to back up what Jake was saying. I live at 11th and Broadway, and every homeless encampment that I experienced within 6 blocks, within 24 hours, there was a fence with the orange fencing. So again, Nick, I know you're saying this doesn't come from the city, but it just seems awfully strange. So who besides 311 could an advisory council person here call to report that? Is there another number we could call? Or do you still want it to go through 311?
And I get the frustration with 311 and agree that it is not as responsive and not as complete a response, but what it does do is centralize and allow kind of distribution of those tasks. But 100% understand the frustration. Great, you centralized it, you've distributed it, and I still get the same answer or no answer or a weak answer or a relevant answer. So I would say continue to utilize 311. That is charted, that is analyzed on a monthly basis. We measure our 311 response, allows us to see, what issues are really coming to the forefront. This and many of the different symptoms as a result of people experiencing homelessness and struggles out there certainly has been over the past 2 years something that's very much accelerated. But as frustrating as it may seem, 311 still is the best request. Of course, emergencies, that's a different story. That's where get into some other avenues with police and things like that. But right now, understanding that it's frustrating to hear, 311 is still the best clearinghouse for issues as they relate to the city.
Thank you. The second issue I wanted to bring up is I'd really like to have this as an agenda item for our next meeting is the right of way, the issue of rocks, and basically homeowners basically saying you're not welcome here. We don't want you here. We don't want you parking here. This is not only an inconvenience, it's a violation for people with disabilities because they cannot exit their car when there's big boulders in the right of way. So I'd really like to see what the criteria is for granting people permission to do that. And I think this advisory committee should be able to weigh in on that. I know there's probably some cases where maybe it's justified, but that's a big deal for parking. And I'd really like to see that fully vetted at our next meeting.
Yep, we can do that.
I would add that that's a great topic. And, just listening to you, I really hadn't thought about the impediment for a passenger with any disability navigating a rocky easement. Thank you.
I just had a quick question for you, Nick, in terms of just 311. Like Jake said, I know when multiple requests are, I guess, tagged to one property or location, does 311 prioritize those? Does it kick it up, in comparison, say, hey, one property got one tag and then another property got 10 tags, or is it just kind of all a list? How does that work?
It's a list. It distributes to the department. It assigns. So 311 is basically a clearinghouse. It's an independent department within the city, receives that information, then within a Salesforce system distributes out to the departments. Those departments then do see all that data and allow those departments to prioritize that.
Gotcha. So I guess that kind of speaks to Jake's point where you would get like 7 different case numbers, and it doesn't really kind of alert you to like, hey, this is a request we've gotten or a property that's been tagged multiple times. So I guess I just want to get some clarity on that.
And certainly if it would interest this group, I think we could give more of a presentation on 311, the 311 process, give some facts and figures around there, if that's of interest to you, just a suggestion.
Anyone else have any more questions for Michael or Nick? Perfect. Well, Michael, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Nick, thank you too for jumping in on that as well. The next topic, hopefully we can get through this pretty quickly, is advisory subcommittees. And want to kind of I'll just throw a couple that I wrote down and see if anyone else wants to add to that, so we can kind of get to the odds and ends of this meeting. Budget, policy, community engagement, project, group. Those are 4. So again, that's budget, which will overlay with finance, policy, community engagement, projects, and then a 5th one could be operations, so that catches anything like our trash, those whole types of things. So did anyone have any suggestions outside of those 5? Michael.
Yes, I am looking at the Denver goals, the goals of the Denver Moves Everyone. And there are two categories. One category is defined as goals. The second category is defined as values. The goals are mobility, safety, sustainability, community, equality. The values are, and I'm paraphrasing some of this just for purposes of my notes. Neighborhood streets, climate change, convenient mobility choices, reliable travel, safety and security, social and racial justice. How would the proposed committees fit those particular goals and values? Would it be better to have committees structured along those lines as opposed to budget, policy, etc.? That's just a question I have for all of you. Just seems like it'd be a better organized way. I'm not really sure. They're pretty broad when we talk about projects, operations. They're pretty broad categories. And I wonder sometimes if we're kind of getting out of our league into things that are almost pet projects as opposed to the greater context of what the Denver Mobility is trying to accomplish. That's my question and comment.
Thanks, Michael. People just jump in. Let me know what you think. I'm still thinking on the answer to that, Michael, but everybody, please feel free to jump in as well.
One thing I was thinking about, Antonio, and just reflecting on the committees is I think we have a lot of transportation and like infrastructure minded people, and I want to make sure we don't as the advisory board to the department, I want to make sure we don't miss over groups like solid waste, kind of the other like truly public works kind of projects or operational things that DOTI is working on. I don't know if that fits into operations, but I want to make sure, I don't know if it needs like a separate home just so that people can keep a clear focus on that. I know it's maybe not, I don't know that anyone as a child was dreaming of solid waste, but we've got to cover it, and it's an issue for the department, and I want to make sure it doesn't get skipped over. And I'm not volunteering necessarily.
Thanks, Jake. I think I definitely thought that would fall under the operations for sure. And it was really kind of one of those, that operations budget was really one of those catch-all, everything else that didn't fall out of the other four. But I guess the reason I came up with 5, and if we need more, we can definitely do that. But I just didn't want to split us up too much, or people joining 2, 3 subcommittees if they're, don't have that time. So I think the title of these probably won't encapsulate everything. And this is kind of answering your question too, Michael. Want to encapsulate everything that these groups will cover in their time. But, when we're talking about climate, when we're talking about equity, those things, we talk about sustainabilities. I don't think that is limited to just one group. And I think that touches everything because, for example, when we talk about climate, that talks about how we spend our dollars, what policies do we have in place, what do our communities want to see in terms of climate change and responding to that, and then that touches on, well, what projects are we doing and what projects are contributing or not contributing or bettering our environments for climate. So I think it was that's kind of what I was thinking in terms of having 5. And again, I think people don't have to be limited to those tools like, hey, I want to join project. You don't have to be limited to that subcommittee, but we do want to have a core team in each of those. And so that's kind of what I was thinking in that. But if everyone thinks that we need to have even more groups, I'm fine with that. I just didn't want to overburden people with subcommittees. Go ahead, Brian.
Oh yeah, Antonio, thanks for putting this together. I know how hard it is to really start the conversation around subcommittees, and I think it really is a conversation. In particular, I want to call out some of projects and public community engagement, it seems like those are really cross-cutting around a lot of the work that we would hope to be doing kind of in any capacity. So I don't know how, for instance, if we're working on a project, you're also doing community engagement, your policy is a part of that, and you're certainly looking at the finance for it. So it seems like that kind of segments those responsibilities a little bit too much. But also I encourage us to think about what permanent subcommittees there are versus ad hoc subcommittees, because I think you can always have an ad hoc subcommittee for a specific focus.
Yeah, I agree with that sentiment completely, Brian, in terms of having these intervention committees for, who knows what may arise, next month. So I think that to have the ability to put a group together that quick to respond to something, I don't think that's beyond us. I would like to kind of hear some other thoughts too on these subcommittees as well. Because so far only 3 or 4 of us that's speaking, and I definitely want to get a post for the rest of the board too. So no answer is wrong. These are not set in stones. These are just like, hey, these are 5 I've seen on other committees, and it's just a starting place for us. So definitely want to keep this open and free flowing. And Brian, I'm looking for an answer to your the crossing between projects and community engagement, only because Alicia dropped off a comment prior to that. I'm kind of speaking to that too as well. So I'm just kind of scrolling right back up through the top of the messages. Chris, jump in.
Yeah, thanks, Antonio. I think it's a good topic for us to talk about, and I know we're limited on time, but my question, you mentioned something earlier about if people wanted to be, in multiple groups and things like that. I wanted, is in other boards that I've been in, you're either in one or the other, and you focus on that. So, instead of going larger, I'm thinking more global. Like, should we do 2 so people can have, like operations and budget, to your point, they speak on so many things, and it doesn't limit us to just a specific topic within that particular category. Don't know if it's a good idea, team here, other advisory or board members, just a thought that I've seen in other boards that I've been a part of in my past, that, larger groups tend to get more value out of these discussions. And it gives us more, I guess, broader focus, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Jonathan?
Hi, yeah, just commenting in response to that. I would see some value in narrowing the focus of the subcommittees. I mean, I think part of what we struggle with on a call like this is we only have 2 hours a month to cover such a broad range of topics and then try to hear everyone's voices. By narrowing those groups, they can focus in at a deeper level than this wider group ever can, and can report up here later. On the 5 suggestions, I definitely think we need a budget finance area that's like a core part of our charter. I like how you set them out here, but I am curious to know what you saw as the intent or sort of the actions or charter that policy and community engagement would have. This partly speaks to Brian's comment around community engagement. We're going to see a lot of community engagement and methodologies around specific projects or operational actions. Policy, I can also see over sort of cross-cutting here in the sense of we have projects that are on the strategic transportation plan, Denver moves updates, things like that. Those kind of are also the department policies. So I do like them in theory, but I'm trying to figure out what the examples of their purpose would be, or if we should really just have maybe budget finance, projects, operations, and I might even advocate to split operations. DOTI's org chart has project delivery administration, operations administration, and then utilities administration. So that would be like 3 groups instead of just projects and operations there. That was kind of a lot. But I think the only question there was really around like, what did you see as the intent of the policy group or the community engagement group?
Yeah, one thing that came immediately to mind when we talk about policy, looking at our complete streets guidelines policy, something that's currently, hopefully, Director Phillips will sign and that become, regulation and standards. But looking at those, for example, to see what can we do to actually make a pathway in terms of, hey, we got the complete streets guideline, we got the director potentially signing this guideline to be an enforcement standard, and then that creation of the standard. So what are we doing to kind of move our policies into more of standards? And so it's kind of looking at that, because we saw, for multiple years, complete street guidelines just sit there as a standard, and having a group kind of focus on moving that to move it towards more of a direction of creating a standard. I think that's one thing that could be really helpful when we're talking about wanting to see transportation or how we design our streets, things like that, move from an advisory role to becoming the standard in our city. So that's kind of one thing that I was thinking about, and seeing there's an opportunity to explore more of that. I also think too, like if we get into these groups and it doesn't work, like we shut it down and we go to something else too as well. So I don't think these are finite. I think there's still going to be, when we establish what these groups are, I think there's still going to be a lot of that figuring out or exploring what these look like too as well. So that was kind of my thought process on the policy. Community engagement, the one that where I was looking at, I was reading Alicia's quote. She said that I would like to have a subcommittee specifically focus on equity, parentheses, social determinants, and community engagement, meaning I'd like to see it develop a formal community engagement process / assessment to gauge our efforts. So I guess it's not just only how are we going about doing community engagement, but always having that, I guess, ever evolving eye of is what we're doing enough? Are there different ways that we can be exploring community engagement that way? So I think that's what I've seen in other groups too as well, where especially when we're talking about coming up with different moves, like that's a big piece of that. And so making sure that we have a group that's really focused on that, especially when we talk about having each one of you guys who represent a different district, there are different ways to approach each community. So I think having a group focus on that, especially when we talk about different moves, I think is what I was envisioning for that too as well.
Thanks. And just to respond to that briefly, yeah, it's a really good point. We can like split or merge these anytime. If we just have an operations group and we find that the scope is too broad, we could always just split at the next meeting. I think the most important thing is that we just get started with the subcommittees. Otherwise, we're going to lose more and more months talking about them instead of doing anything with them.
Yeah, I agree with that. What time is it? Sorry. I think too, just like, and I think the whole point of having a subcommittee is to ensure that we have a core group of people. For example, Colfax BRT has come up multiple times. Having a group that we can dedicate to who know outside of this meeting is looking to that further than what we can do in this meeting. So I think just like having those things that we can divide and conquer, and we know that people are taking a deeper look to come back and inform the rest of the group, I think it's important. Go ahead, Brian.
I think one thing to consider too is potentially segmenting when you create the subcommittees. I don't think you need to create them all right now. As work comes up, I think that could be a good time to consider it.
I agree. Also too, I mean, these, go ahead, Michael.
Let me just unmute that. Hi, back again. I appreciate where you're going with it, but I'll be honest, I'm totally lost. You got a budget committee. You're telling me we're going to have a budget committee. Fine. Budget encompasses everything. It's mobility, safety. It seems as though we're kind of, I'm not sure how this is supposed to work. So if you create the 5 committees, you could just say who wants to be on which committee. People could raise their hands, say, okay. If you get nobody on community or sustainability, whatever it happens to be, explain to me how that's going to work. Someone's going to have to make a decision. You're going to ask people to be on 2 committees, 1 committee. I don't even, right now, I haven't got a clue how this is going to work.
Yeah.
Maybe what we need is some thought as to, if you want to have 5 committees and everybody's in agreement, that's fine. Okay. But the question is, I'd like to know if I'm going to be on one of these committees, every one of these topics concerns every one of these committees. How do you distinguish what your role, your objectives, your conclusions, your recommendations are supposed to be? And I don't know, do you want a committee to create functions for these? Is that going to be your job? Or are you just going to say people join a committee and try to figure out, and we'll come back and say, well, this is what the committee decided to do. And someone else might say, well, yeah, but I don't get it. I don't understand what that committee is supposed to be doing. Can you help me with that? Okay. I want to be helpful with this, but it raises more questions than it's creating answers, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I can speak directly to that. And I'll use today's presentation. And forgive me, guys, we've gone over, but when we're talking about the budget, I don't know if everybody who leaves this meeting is taking a look at the information that we just received. And so having especially when we talk about this split percentage that we just look at, having a group who's dedicated to actually taking that, who's responsible, I should say, for taking that deeper dive into what those numbers actually go out, correspond to, like it's initially when we set subcommittees, you're signing up for the additional responsibility of looking deeper than what the overall board is. And so that's my experience in that. And so when we say budget, when we have this conversation in April come up and they present who knows how much information to us, that budget group will be responsible for leading that conversation in that subcommittee, but then coming back to the group as a whole, facilitating that. So when we talk about that, it's really, when we sign up for subcommittees, these are areas of responsibility as a group, as a subcommittee we're trying into. So that's what I'm thinking in terms of budgeting. When we have all this information that's going to come up in April, having a group who's willing to dive into that, that's what I envision a subcommittee. And then I don't want to decide, hey, you go into this group. I think the initial approach is, hey, let's see who wants to be in what. And then if we have a split, if we have a group where nobody wants to be involved, then we'll ask that question to see if people really want to be a part of that group again. But I think the initial part of that is just allowing everybody to kind of filter where they want to, where they feel pulled, and then going from there.
I think we need some more clarity as to what these committees are supposed to do.
Can I cover this a little bit? Yeah, I think like in a lot of governing bodies, and I know some people on here have worked in a subcommittee board environment. I think the way it'll typically work is we have a topic and we will run out of agenda time at the next meeting, right? Or in the next coming meetings. And so as a group, we could decide to delegate that to a subcommittee, which could dive deeper and then come back with whatever has been referred to them, right? And that's typically how, large bodies that have a lot of work that need to get done, like say, like the Senate doesn't just have a budget committee, right? So there's lots of committees in the Senate, right, that cover different topics. And the way that it typically works is we can delegate down and then elevate back up, right? So it's not that these topics are uninteresting to any one of us in this group, but we have a lot of topics for 12 meetings a year. So the subcommittees really help us get throughput, right? And really give our ability to enhance the work that this group can do and increase the volume and the speed a little bit. Otherwise, we probably won't get to many of the topics that I know we care about for many months or years.
If I could also use an example, Julie just dropped in there a comment. I would like to hear more how we receive feedback. I've been hoping to talk about this in the last 2 meetings, and obviously we run over time. So having a community engagement group who look into what is our response to community inquiries, they can lead the charge on that and say, hey, come back to the group. This is what we propose, how we handle our community engagement responses. And then we take a vote, or it goes back down, we have another conversation. So it's kind of this topic where it's very important, if we want to keep our community involved, to have groups who can bang out these quick solutions to how we want to move forward as a board, propose that, and then we can move on without waiting until next month to hear or even talk about it. So it just gives us that, subcommittees give us that time in between today and March's meeting to have a discussion on topics that are relevant to the board. Go ahead, Alan.
I was just going to say, could we move just to go with the list that you've got here, Antonio? I think it's a good start.
Okay.
And we could see between now and next month, we could do a sign up to see who's interested in what committees, and per the previous discussion, we can at least get started on these. And if someone's not interested in one, we can drop that potentially.
We can do that.
Seconded.
Yeah, just about that.
Well,
Okay, go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, I think what would be helpful is to get some sense. I understand what you're saying. You're doing a great job in trying to help bring some clarity to what these committees are supposed to do. But it might be useful maybe to just kind of get some sense of at least an idea of what each committee's purview would be, responsibilities, and what you'd like to see, which could be changed, of course, obviously it could be changed.
Yeah.
Right now, I would not know how to distinguish whether going into policy versus projects. I could raise my hand and see what happens. That could take 2 or 3 months before we figured out, well, what is a project committee supposed to really do? And I'd be happy to help you with that as far as that goes. I mean, I'm offering to even help you with that, but it might have some, I think it would be beneficial to the committee members if they said, well, policy committee wants to essentially do this with some modifications or adjustments as time goes on, of course. Budget committee is going to have sort of this purview, et cetera. That may be a way to start this so that people would have a better sense of what this committee is going to do. That would be my suggestion.
Just a point of clarity. There's a motion on the floor.
Yep.
Can we take a vote on that, Antonio?
Yes. If everyone in favor of forming these 5 subcommittees of budget, policy, community engagement, project, and operations, raise your hand or say aye. Do we need to do a roll call?
It depends on if you do ayes and nays, and you can't really, basically, if there's any dissension between the two, then you do.
Okay.
Unfortunately.
Gotcha. I'll just do a roll call for what's, actually, I'm sorry, but.
You want to just go off of a verbal ayes, Antonio, and see if there's any dissents?
Yes.
Yeah, I was double checking to make sure we had enough people on the.
You do.
Okay, gotcha. Cool. Jamie?
Oh, no, I was just raising my hand for the vote. That's all.
No, I was going to do a quick roll call for say.
Oh, okay. Aye. I'm sorry.
Brian?
I think we were all raising the vote, so
Okay.
do the roll call instead. Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, thank you. Nice. All right. What I'll do is I'll create a Google Doc. I'll do a draft of what each committee would be responsible for, and I'll leave space for a comment if people want to add or subtract what these subcommittees are for, and it's a living document. Everybody agree with that?
Sounds great.
Perfect. And then on the agenda for next month, definitely want to get in. I know previously we talked about actually Dr. Carr coming in March. Michelle, can you speak to that for a quick second?
Yes, we'll make that happen.
Okay, cool. Sweet. And then we can add right of way to that per Jamie's request. And then any other topics do we want to hear? Quick second. Budget is going to come in April. So we're getting that from from the DOTI staff.
Antonio, can I get a copy of that as well, please? Sorry about that. I missed last month because I came down with COVID. So
Glad to hear you back.
yeah, thanks, man.
Cool. Any other topics outside of Dr. Cog right away?
I think Alan's about the letter that was drafted.
Oh, yeah. So I'm ready to take another pat to send that out. So that's kind of where that's where I'm at.
Can we then start next meeting with a vote on that or
Yeah.
something along those lines?
Yeah. So I reviewed all the comments, made adjustments accordingly. So next meeting we can vote to send that.
I'm sorry, I think I got a little lost here. Did we decide not to vote on that motion that was on the floor? I think you were gonna do ayes and nays, and I think we like moved on from that. Or did I miss something?
Oh, I was going to do ayes and nays, but I thought I heard someone say that everybody's raised their hand. So that's why.
All right.
Eh,
I was just for the sake of the minutes, I wanted to make sure I had this down correctly. Like there
Gotcha.
were no were there no dissents, and it sounded like there were no dissents.
Yes, there were no dissents.
That's what I thought. Okay.
Thanks.
Cool. Okay, well then we have Dr. Cog right of way and a vote on a letter to the mayor. That's all I have. Yeah, so that leaves potentially one more slot. So if you guys have anything you want to see on the agenda next month, like always, shoot us an email, me, Raymond, and Michelle, and Jonathan.
All right, thanks all.
All right, guys. Thank you for your extra time. Have a good night.
Night.
Well, good night, everybody. See you next month.
Thank you.
All right, bye-bye.